Hello everyone, this is the fifth in the series of the FLIMSY 3 weeks, and I'd like to speak today about Duchening on Tisha Bav. Duchening is a positive commandment. There's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't duchen as we do every day. So in Israel we duchen every day, and outside of Israel you say Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avotenu barchenu b'bracha mishuleshet. God, please give us this bracha even without Kohanim, at least in Ashkenazic shuls. Why not on Tisha Bav? The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch brings the following halacha: during Chazarat Hashatz, Eino Omer Birkat Kohanim. You do not say Birkas Kohanim in the morning at Shacharit. Just for you not to think this is an Ashkenazic thing, the Abu Draham, who's a Sephardi, says exactly the same thing. Chazer Shatz Tefillah Eino Omer Birkat Kohanim. So the question is why? Why is it that we omit Duchening at Shacharit of Tisha Bav? Comes along the Shacharit Knesset Hagdolah, Rav Ben Abishti, and says the following 3 reasons. Reason number 1, Shekohen Avel Eino Noseh Kapav. Someone that is in Avelus, namely in mourning, does not duchen. The Shulchan Aruch indeed paskins that you don't duchen during Shiva, and then you do. The Ramah says you don't duchen the whole time that you're in mourning, namely 30 days for all relatives, 12 months for your father or mother. From this perspective, says the Shacharit Knesset Hagdolah, Afkan, even on Tisha Bav, Kol ha'olam kulo b'tzar b'yegol ha'churban beit mikdashenu. We're all in mourning because of no Beis HaMikdash. Ve'ech ha'kohanim yisu kapehem ve'hem shruim be'evel. And how do you want the Kohanim who are in mourning to indeed go ahead and duchen? Reason number 2, brought by the Shibolei Haleket, is that it's specific to Tisha B'Av. We read in the Haftorah right before Tisha B'Av that Ubeparishchem kapechem alim einai mikem. When you put out your hands, you Kohanim, I will ignore it. Namely, God will not bring the bracha down. And therefore, specifically on the eve of the Churban, on the eve of the destruction of the temple, God said those words. Obviously, on the day itself, we won't duchen. And a 3rd reason is brought by the Gogol Mervava, the famous Noda Yehuda, who comes along and says that actually on Tisha B'Av, one of the prohibitions is She'ilat Shalom, Ve'ech Yomah B'yasem Lecha Shalom. Indeed, one of the brachos of Birkat Kohanim is God should put peace on you, or Shalom. And we don't say the word Shalom on Tisha B'Av, we don't say hello, goodbye, and therefore you can't duchen. So, quite frankly, you understand why you don't duchen on Tisha B'Av. But here, we have a monkey wrench. And that is that all of a sudden at Mincha, we do. Either you say Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avotenu, or the Kohanim do duchen. Now, I want to make clear, the Kohanim never duchen at Mincha per se. They only duchen at Mincha if it looks like Ne'ilah. If the Mincha is later in the day, close to Shkia, and it looks like Ne'ilah, then, and only then, do the Kohanim duchen. But on a regular Mincha, the rabbis made an enactment not to duchen, because on most days the Kohanim do eat and drink, and maybe they'll be intoxicated. So the only time that they duchen is later in the day, what we call Mincha Ketana, and only after Plag HaMincha, after that time of the day. Having said that, indeed the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says, B'mincha, Hashliach Tzibur B'chazarat Tefillah Omer Birkas Kohanim. So what changed from Shacharit to Mincha? These 3 reasons seems as relevant at Shacharit as they do at Mincha. I would like to suggest, I'll tell you what changes at Mincha. The Jewish people went through an experience. They said keynote, they read Eicha, and hopefully they didn't go through just the motions, but also the emotions. And the most important emotion for us today is not so much the first destruction of the temple, but the second. After all, we're in the 3 weeks. The 3 weeks start at 17th of Tammuz. But in the first temple, the walls of Jerusalem were breached, not on the 17th of Tammuz. The Pasuk says in Yirmiyah explicitly, B'chodesh HaRevi'i b'tish'ala chodesh hufka'a ha'ir. It actually was on the 9th. And yet, we start our mourning practices from the 17th because that is the most recent, the second destruction of the temple. From this perspective, why is it that the second temple was destroyed? The Gemara in Yuma says explicitly why. And that is that there were many mitzvot the Jewish people did, but there was one thing they weren't doing, or to be more precise, they were engaged in too much, and that is sinat chinam, baseless hatred. From this perspective, maybe the reason we don't duchen is the following. As everybody remembers, the first time the Jewish people were engaged in baseless hatred was when the tribes fought against Yosef, and they sold him into slavery. And on Yom Kippur, as everybody remembers, we quote a famous medrash. The medrash says in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer that when they sold Yosef into slavery, then machur oto leishmaelim be'esrim kesef, ve'kol echad ve'echad natal shnei ksafim. They sold him for 20. Everyone took 2, in order to liknot min alim beragleihem, in order to buy shoes. Shene'emar pasuk in Amos amichram ba'kesef tzadik, on the fact that they sold a tzaddik, namely Yosef, into slavery. The Evyan be'avor na'alayim, a poor guy they sold for shoes. And indeed, in the Eila Eskara that we say on Yom Kippur to remember the 10 martyrs, we indeed say these words explicitly, that ultimately this whole terrible 10 martyrs who were killed in terrible ways, including Rabbi Akiva and others, is all because of l'rochat Ishmaelim secharuhu uve'ad na'alayim netanuhu. They sold him to Yishmaelim for shoes. And now, says the Baal HaPiyut, Ba'atem tisu avon avotechem, you have to atone for it. Says Rav Tzvi Reisman in his book Raska Tzvi, that the whole sin of Mechirat Yosef, of selling Yosef, started with shoes. In other words, shoes is the symbol of not being united. And therefore, he says, when you go ahead and duchen, you have to take off your shoes, because in order to duchen, you have to bless the Jewish people be'ahava, with love. You can't do that with shoes, which is the symbol of non-ahava, because those shoes remind us of the first time that there was no love between the Jewish people, but rather they were split. And therefore, says Rav Tzvi Reisman, that's the reason alav lachlotz et hana'alayim b'sha'at birkat hakohanim hamiramzot al inyan he'eder ha'achva v'harayut ben adam lechaveiro. That's why you take off your shoes, because shoes is the symbol of what divides us. And therefore, I would like to suggest that at Shacharis, we're still in mourning, we're still collecting our thoughts, we're trying to understand why did this happen. But by Mincha time, after going through the keynote, getting off the floor, and we collected our thoughts, the first resolution has to be no more sinat chinam, because that's the reason why this whole day is happening. And if we indeed get to that level, then we can say Birkas Kohanim. We can take off our shoes and say we are now in total unity with the Jewish people. From this perspective, you understand that when a Kohen goes up to duchen, he has to be very careful with many, many laws. Amongst them is the following law. When he says the words, Amevarechet Amo Yisrael ba'ahava, the bracha that the Shulchan Aruch says to say before he duchens, comments the Magen Avraham based on the Zohar, Kol Kohen de lo rachim la'ama, or ama lo rachim le lo yisak kapav. If you don't have mercy towards your fellow Jew, don't duchen. You washed your hands, you took off your shoes, did everything properly, you don't have mercy in your heart, don't duchen. The Mishnah Berurah says, Kohen shad tzibur sonimoto hu sonet tzibur. If the Kohen is hated by the congregation or he hates the congregation, sakanahu lakohenim yisakapav. It's dangerous for the Kohen to actually duchen. From this perspective, Shacharis, we're not there yet. We're still collecting our thoughts. We're mourning over that baseless hatred that shouldn't have been there. But by Mincha, hopefully, we internalize the message. And at Mincha, indeed, you can take off your shoes, be in total unity with the Jewish people, hopefully leave baseless hatred far behind you, and duchen.